I was drafted. I didn't want to go because I didn't want to leave my family. I had married and had a 4-year-old boy. But let's put it this way. I have 4 other brothers that were in the Army. We're not Sullivans, but each one of us joined up. My brother Manuel had a Purple Heart. He was in the 5th Armored Division, and he got hit. My brother Speed went out to Washington, and he was, I think, in the Medical Corps. My brother Benji, I think he was in the intelligence. He could write Portuguese, and I think they had him in the intelligence to decipher Portuguese. My brother Eddie was at Anzio, and he got hit with shrapnel, and when he was home, he was here with a brace on his back, because where the shrapnel had hit his back, he could hardly walk. They were wondering if he'd ever walk again. So when he came back, I hadn't even been drafted. And I says, Eddie, I says, what you got to say about a guy going being drafted? He says, if they say dig, dig. He says, I didn't dig. Of course, I always dug. But, and I was 34. I wasn't as old as Joe Serpa. He was 43 when he was drafted, and 44 is the takeoff. He's from Edgertown. He wound up as a cook in the Army, and I wound up in the infantry. I was pretty near 36 when I got out, because my birthday was in December, and I didn't get out till January, around the 1st of January.
So where did you train?
I went to Blandon in Florida. And it was supposed to be 1 year's regular Army training in 17 weeks. And we went by the clock all the time. Every Monday morning, you could get out and go to the bulletin board, and you could see what you was going to do for the next 6 days. And the next 5 days, because Saturday and Sunday, unless you got company guard or battalion guard, you had free time the weekends. And then after that, they sent us to Indiana, to Camp Atterbury, for some more intensive training. They didn't think we'd had enough in 17 weeks. In Blandon, it was intense. In Atterbury, they had an Indian to show us how to go through wheat fields without making the wheat move. That was one of the things. And nobody could do it. This guy knew what he was doing. I don't know if he was an Indian or not, but he would go through the wheat field, and you wouldn't even see a ripple. And then they'd put a guy with a pack on his back and a rifle, and he'd go through, and it looked like there was a cow in there. And then we did some more firing with different weapons in Atterbury, and some of the guys hadn't passed 50 calibers. And machine guns and pistols, they would give you a little more training than that. But when we were sent overseas, the war was all over, remember? I went over in November in 44. Yeah, we had pushing the Germans back. The war was practically over. Everybody was picking up and hoping to come home. And then all of a sudden, the Battle of Bulge started. That's where we were. We had been put in the Battle of Bulge, a new outfit, green, hadn't heard a shot fired, and all of a sudden, I remember the day that we were standing in line. We were up quite close to the front, so the lieutenant told us to stand 6 or 8 paces apart in case any shells come in who wouldn't clean us out. So you could see the guy ahead of you. He was 5 or 6 paces ahead of him. I was with my mess kit, and I think that morning we were having oatmeal or something. We were having something hot. And then all of a sudden, before I got about 4 guys from the kitchen, from where they had set the kitchen up, and the lieutenant come by, he says, stop by the supply room and pick up 2 extra bandoliers of ammunition and get up to the front. He says, we're going right up there. So we got up to the front, and we replaced, I think the kid was from 117th Regiment. And I I says, I'm supposed to take your place? He says, yeah, I'm glad to get out of here. And I says, has there been all this noise? Like, oh, there was shells coming in right and left. He says, I've been here 6 weeks. He says, and today, I've heard more shells today than I have in 6 weeks. So that was what we were blessed with when we got up to the front. And then, of course, we lost in a division. There's 3 regiments. It's about 10, 11,000 men. So we lost the 422nd and the 423rd, just about 8,000 men. We lost them completely. The Germans just overran them. And the 424th, which I was in, they drove us back and they drove us everywhere. And finally, I think one time I heard the lieutenant, they were counting off how many were in the company, and there was 38, and there's supposed to be about 180 in the company. It was 38. The rest of them were all spread out all over, everywhere, after the Bulge. And they had to count every day to find out how many rations you wanted up the front. So we were made into a combat team. I got tired, he says, being in the combat. They moved us 4 or 5 times in one day, but they needed us. And we were just moved, and sometimes it was in trucks, sometimes we'd have to get up and walk a mile or 2. But they were trying to organize us. And as I say, my company, E Company, was down to less than 40 men at one time. But they weren't all killed. I mean, they were spread out all over. You find out when you have artillery come in, your company will disperse, and things just go to the wind. You don't stand there like the old British used to do, and they wondered why the farmers from behind stone walls were picking them off, because you don't go up to the front and stand there and shoot back at the enemy. You dig a hole or you run, and you do all kinds of things. The foot soldier. I was the foot soldier. I had an M1, and I had the grenades, and that's all you needed. And the tankers were scared to death of foot soldiers. The man in the tank, he didn't like foot soldiers because he couldn't shoot a foot soldier. He couldn't turn his gun down. If a guy got near his tank, he could throw a Molotov cocktail, or he could hit him with a bazooka. He could knock out his tank. So foot soldiers were really respected. You got used to small fire.